He was the man everyone envied, powerful, wealthy, untouchable. The CEO who could buy anything, command anyone, and walk away from every problem without looking back. But there was one decision, one cold choice, that even his billions couldn't erase. Years ago, when she stood in front of him with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes, begging for love instead of power, he turned his back. He let her walk away pregnant, carrying the only piece of him that truly mattered. Now, years later, when fate forced their paths to cross again, the truth hit him harder than any boardroom battle. He hadn't just lost her, he had lost time with his own child. And no money, no influence, no empire could undo what was already written. This is the story of pride, heartbreak, and the regret that even a CEO couldn't escape. The city skyline glimmered under the night sky. Towering glass buildings reflecting the neon glow of power, wealth, and ambition. At the very center of it all stood Alexander Stone, a man the world knew as the unshakable CEO. He had built an empire with his own hands, turning a small company into a global force. Every business magazine carried his face, every investor wanted a piece of his vision, and every rival feared his relentless pursuit of success. But behind the sharp suits, luxury cars, and private jets, there was a story no headline could capture, a story buried deep in the shadows of his past, a story about a woman he once loved, and a decision that would haunt him for years to come. Her name was Isabella. She wasn't like anyone else he had ever met. Where his world was filled with contracts, numbers, and negotiations, hers was alive with dreams, laughter, and compassion. She worked as a teacher in a small community school, earning little but giving everything. Her heart wasn't moved by wealth or status. She cared only for sincerity, honesty, and love. When Alexander met her, he was still rising, still hungry. He wasn't the billionaire everyone feared yet, just an ambitious young man burning to prove himself. She had seen the man behind the ambition, the man who still laughed, who still dreamed beyond numbers. She fell in love with him, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to fall too. But ambition is a dangerous lover. The night everything changed was quiet, ordinary even. They had just returned from dinner, Isabella holding his hand, her eyes glowing with trust. But Alexander's mind wasn't on her, it was on the deal he had just closed, the empire he was building, and the sacrifices he believed were necessary. "Alex," she whispered softly, breaking the silence. "I need to tell you something." He looked at her, distracted, already checking his phone for emails. "What is it?" Her voice trembled. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, his world froze. He stared at her, stunned, unable to process the words. Pregnant. His child. It should have been joy. It should have been a moment that melted all his walls. But instead, he felt fear, anger, and something colder than he had ever known. This can't happen right now," he said sharply, his tone colder than he intended. Her eyes filled with tears. "Can't happen. Alex, this is our child." "No," he snapped, running a hand through his hair. "Do you understand what this means? My career, my company, it's everything right now. A child will ruin everything I've worked for. I can't afford distractions." Her heart broke at his words. "Distractions? You think our baby is a distraction?" He didn't answer. His silence was louder than words. That night, Isabella made her choice. She walked away. She left the man she loved, carrying the child he had refused to acknowledge. Alexander told himself it was necessary. He told himself love was a weakness, family was a burden, and sacrifice was the price of power. And for years, he believed it. But time has a way of exposing lies. Years later, when his empire stood tall, when his name commanded fear and respect, when he sat in glass towers looking down at the world he conquered, there were nights when silence consumed him. Nights when he remembered her eyes, her tears, her trembling voice. Nights when he wondered about the child. Was it a boy or a girl? Did they laugh like him? Did they dream like her? But he buried those thoughts beneath contracts, parties, and endless success. Until fate decided to remind him of the choice he made. It was a cold winter morning when Alexander arrived at a charity gala. As always, cameras flashed, journalists shouted, and businessmen lined up to shake his hand. He was untouchable, untamed, unstoppable. Or so he thought. And then, he saw her. Isabella. She stood across the hall, dressed simply yet gracefully, her beauty untouched by the years. But she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a little girl, no more than 7 years old, clutching her hand tightly. The child's hair was dark like Alexander's, her eyes sparkling with the same intensity, and in that instant, the truth hit him like a storm. The child was his. His breath caught in his throat. For years, he had buried the thought, pushed it away, convinced himself it was better this way. But seeing them, he realized what he had truly lost. Not just Isabella, not just a love that could have balanced his ambition, but years of his child's life. First steps, first words, first laughter all gone. All stolen by his pride. Isabella noticed him, her expression tightening. She turned, quickly, shielding the child, and began to walk away. But Alexander's legs moved before his mind could stop them. "Isabella," he called out, his voice echoing through the hall. She froze. Slowly, she turned, her eyes sharp, filled with memories of betrayal. "We need to talk," he said, his voice breaking in a way no one had ever heard before. But Isabella's answer was firm, steady, unshaken. "Now you want to talk." Years later, after everything, the child tugged at her hand, curious but silent. Alexander's heart crumbled. The empire he had built, the billions he controlled, it all meant nothing compared to the little girl staring at him with eyes that looked just like his dot. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Stone, the man the world feared, felt powerless. The hall buzzed with chatter, but for Alexander Stone, the noise had faded into nothingness. His empire, his status, his wealth, all of it dissolved into shadows as his eyes fixed on the little girl beside Isabella. The girl's gaze flickered between her mother and him, puzzled, innocent, unaware of the storm that churned between them. "Please," Alexander said again, softer this time, "Isabella, we need to talk." For a moment, Isabella said nothing. Her lips pressed tightly together. Her hand clutched protectively around her daughter's. Then, with a sigh that carried years of heartbreak, she gave a single nod. "Not here," she whispered. They slipped out of the glittering gala, leaving the flash of cameras and shallow applause behind. A black car waited at the curb, but Isabella shook her head when Alexander offered to open the door. Instead, they walked down the street in silence, their footsteps echoing against the frozen pavement. Finally, Isabella stopped beneath the glow of a street lamp. The little girl leaned against her, shivering slightly in the winter air. "Her name is Sophia," Isabella said quietly, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "She's 7 years old. She loves to draw, hates broccoli, and has the wildest imagination you could ever dream of. Everything she is, everything she will be. I raised her alone." Alexander swallowed hard, his throat tightening. Sophia, the name felt foreign on his tongue, and yet it pulsed with something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Isabella's eyes hardened. "You don't get to say her name like you've earned it. You don't get to stand here and pretend you've been part of her life. Where were you when she cried at night? When she took her first steps? When she asked me why she didn't have a father like the other kids?" Her voice cracked, but her gaze never wavered. Alexander had faced ruthless boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and cutthroat negotiations. But nothing compared to this, being stripped bare by the truth of his own cowardice. "I was a fool," he whispered. "Back then, I thought love would ruin me. I thought a family would break my focus. But I see now. I was already broken." Isabella shook her head. "No, Alex, you weren't broken. You chose power over love. You chose greed over family. And now you want what? Forgiveness. A second chance." Sophia tilted her head, staring at him with wide, curious eyes. "Mommy," she asked softly, tugging at Isabella's coat. "Who is he?" The question pierced Alexander like a blade. His chest tightened, his lips trembled, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. But Isabella knelt down, cupping her daughter's face gently. "He's someone I used to know," she said carefully. "Someone who made mistakes." Sophia nodded, accepting the answer without suspicion, her innocence shielding her from the storm swirling around her. Alexander's voice broke. "Please, Isabella. I know I don't deserve anything, but let me try. Let me be part of her life, even if just a small piece. Let me make it right." Isabella's jaw tightened. "And what happens when your empire calls again? When another billion-dollar deal comes along? Will you vanish like you did before?" He stepped closer, his eyes burning. "No, this time is different. I've built everything I ever wanted, and yet I feel nothing. The money, the power, it's hollow. But seeing her, seeing you, I realize what I threw away. Don't let me make the same mistake twice." Isabella stared at him, torn between anger and the flicker of the love she once knew. Memories crashed over her, their laughter, the passion, the betrayal. Could a man like Alexander Stone truly change, or was this just another negotiation? Another attempt to conquer what he had lost? Actions, she said finally. Not words. If you want to prove yourself, then prove it. Not to me, to her. Alexander nodded slowly, a fire igniting in his chest. For the first time in years, it wasn't ambition driving him, it was love. The days that followed were the hardest Alexander had ever faced. Not because of boardroom battles or financial risks, but because he had to confront himself. He began showing up not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, but as a father. He visited Sophia at school, sitting quietly in the back as she painted with her classmates. He clumsily helped her with homework, stumbling over math problems he could solve in billion-dollar contracts but not in a child's notebook. He sat with her at the park, listening as she told endless stories about princesses and dragons. Her imagination painting worlds richer than any empire. At first, Sophia kept her distance. She laughed, she played, but always with a hint of caution as if afraid he would vanish at any moment. Isabella watched closely, her guard high, her heart hesitant. But slowly, something shifted. One evening, as they walked through the park, Sophia slipped her small hand into Alexander's. He froze, his chest tightening, tears threatening his composure. He looked down. And she smiled up at him, a smile that carried forgiveness he hadn't earned. In that simple gesture, walls crumbled, weeks turned into months, and Alexander found himself living a life he had once run from. The board meetings felt emptier, the endless parties meaningless. He began canceling trips, delegating power, and spending more time in the modest little home where Isabella and Sophia lived. But it wasn't easy. His past haunted him. Rivals mocked his softness, investors questioned his priorities, and whispers filled the industry that Alexander Stone was losing his edge. One night, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Alexander sat with Isabella in the kitchen, the silence heavy. "You're changing," Isabella said quietly, sipping her tea. "Am I?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded. "But I don't know if it will last. I don't know if I can trust you again." He looked at her, his eyes filled with raw honesty. "I don't expect you to trust me overnight. But I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm not the man I was." For the first time in years, Isabella saw something different in his eyes, not hunger for power, but a desperate longing for redemption. The turning point came one stormy night. Alexander was scheduled to fly across the country for a major deal, one that could secure his company's dominance for decades. His team begged him to attend. It was too important, too big to miss. But as he packed his suitcase, Sophia appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "Daddy," she whispered, the word still new on her lips. "Don't go." The suitcase slipped from his hands, his heart pounded. "Why not, sweetheart?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because, what if you don't come back? What if you leave us again?" Alexander dropped to his knees, pulling her into his arms. The storm outside raged, but nothing compared to the storm inside him. He kissed the top of her head, holding her tightly. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Not this time, not ever again." The next morning, the world was shocked when Alexander Stone canceled the billion-dollar deal, walking away from the opportunity of a lifetime. Headlines called it madness, rivals called it weakness, but for Alexander, it was freedom. For the first time, he had chosen love over power. Months later, under a golden sunset, Alexander stood in the park where it had all begun. Sophia laughed as she ran across the grass, her drawings scattered around her. Isabella sat on a bench nearby, her eyes soft, watching them. Alexander approached her, his heart pounding. "I lost you once because I couldn't see what mattered," he said softly. "But now, Isabella, I know. It's not the empire, it's not the billions, it's you. It's her. It's us. I don't want power. I want family." For a long moment, Isabella said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached for his hand. And in that moment, Alexander Stone, the man who had conquered the world, but lost himself, finally found what he had been searching for all along. Not in boardrooms, not in skyscrapers, but in love. The man who once believed family was weakness had discovered the greatest truth. Family was the only strength that mattered. Life is unpredictable. Choices made in anger can lead to years of regret, and sometimes, when the truth finally reveals itself, it's already too late. The CEO thought power and money would shield him from pain, but the moment he saw what he had lost, everything shattered. Her strength, her silence, And the child he never knew about became the sharpest reminder that no amount of wealth can buy back time or undo betrayal. If this story moved you, imagine how many others are living with unspoken regrets. Don't let pride or ego steal your happiness, because once it's gone, it may never return. Subscribe for more heart-wrenching stories of love, betrayal, redemption, and second chances. Every tale carries a lesson, and the next one might just change the way you see your own life.